Minnesota regularly tops the charts in voter turnout, and Secretary of State Steve Simon hopes Minnesota will reach #1 this election season. He's joining me in the studio to talk about his Get Out the Vote efforts. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Minnesota has two significant changes this election cycle, and the first that I'd like to talk about is no excuses absentee ballots.
Right.
So how does that work? What's the change?
It's a huge game changer. The old rule before 2014 was if you wanted to vote absentee in Minnesota, you had to sign an oath under penalty of perjury saying that you were either really sick or you were going to be out of town that day. But the legislature decided, when I was still in the legislature in 2013, to get rid of that excuse. The bottom line is now any Minnesotan, for any reason whatsoever, can decide to vote absentee. And there are two primary ways to do that. One is to go and order it online to come to your home, where you can now vote from your couch or kitchen table. You go to mnvotes.org. That's mnvotes.org.
And we'll put that up afterwards.
Yeah, and you can just order it right there. It takes most people just a couple of minutes, and it's done. Or you can vote.
And that's to order the ballot.
That's to order the ballot, the absentee ballot that comes right to your home. Or you can do it the more traditional way and do absentee voting by going to a designated government office, typically a city or a county office. And if you don't know where that is, you can go to mnvotes.org, type in your address, and it'll tell you where to go.
Okay.
So that's new for a presidential election year. Its sort of maiden voyage, so to speak, was 2014, and the last non-presidential, to great effect. There was a big spike in absentee voting. I think we're going to see an even bigger spike this year for a presidential contest, where we typically enjoy even more turnout. So a real potential game changer.
So the other new significant change is that there's early voting, in-person early voting, that will begin on November 1st and lead up to Election Day.
That's right.
How does that work? Do you go to your precinct, your normal precinct place, or do you go to a certain government place until Election Day? How does that work out?
It's the latter. You go to a designated place, usually a city hall or sometimes a county office, depending on where in Minnesota that you live, and you go in, and the difference this year is as opposed to the old system where when you voted in-person absentee, you had to put your ballot in an envelope, then you put that envelope in another security envelope, and you hand it to someone. And that was a lot of process and a lot of hassle for people on both sides of the counter. It was a lot of hassle for the people counting the ballots and administering the elections, and a lot more hassle for the voters. So the legislature, wisely, this last session decided to get rid of that requirement for the last 7 days. So now when you go in the last 7 days, it's a lot like true early voting would be. You're going in, you're filling out a ballot, and just like on game day, on election day, you're feeding that ballot right into the machine. There's no middleman, middlewoman, or anything. You're feeding it right into the machine for that whole 7-day period before the election.
So there's been an effort really to simplify the voting process, it sounds like.
Right, and it's, like I say, decreased hassle on both sides of that counter.
Okay. Well, Republican Chairman Keith Downey expressed concerns that with these new voting initiatives, there will be more fraud. How would you counter that?
Well, I really have the opposite view of that. And I serve with Keith, and we just have different views on this. I think all of us can agree, no matter what we think about election policy, that the more people register and vote before the election, the more opportunities there are to vet and screen and filter and check. So the very things that Keith says that he wants, which is more screening and filtering and ability to detect any wrongdoing, you can do that far better before Election Day than you can on Election Day. So I think we should all agree that it's a good thing to get people to vote and register earlier, because then you can do a better job, probably, of finding out whether there are any problems. But I should note that historically Minnesota has a very, very low, very small incidence of any wrongdoing or fraud. The latest comprehensive study was out of a state of 5.3 million people, that 38 people in the last election for which there was survey information, 38 people committed wrongful acts. Now that's 38 too many, of course. It should be 0, but we got to put it in some proper rational perspective. 38 out of 5.3 million means that we have a very, very small problem, but one that we should always be vigilant about and we should always address.
We've talked quite a bit on this program about the changing demographics in Minnesota, and your office has had several voting initiatives, one of which was to expand the number of foreign language fact sheets, instructions, and applications, and another was bilingual and young election judges. How are those initiatives working? I
think we've enjoyed great success with that, and I feel very strongly about the foreign language piece for a couple of reasons. We more than doubled the languages that we now offer from 5 to 11, and that just reflects demographic reality. Two things. First, my mother was an immigrant, And I know from her own experience that despite the fact that she was fluent in English, spoke beautiful, almost accent-free English, when it came to technical instructions, whether it was the product manual for the refrigerator or whether it was a technical government document or instruction, she much preferred things in her native language as any of us would. And so I know how much it can be and how effective it can be as a bridge towards greater understanding when you print something that someone needs to know about in their native language. And I would point out, and this is an important point, we have been doing this for 120 years. Starting in 1896, Minnesota printed ballots and other voting instructions in other languages. The only difference between then and now is the languages. It's no longer Swedish and Norwegian and German. It's now Lao and Vietnamese and Spanish and others.
That's really interesting. And then bilingual and young election judges, have you been able to recruit some?
Yes, absolutely. And we've gotten great reports from some counties all over the state, not just in the metro area, but all over greater Minnesota as well, that they have really pushed this particular aspect. And it just stands to reason. That's a reflection of our new demography in Minnesota. And we've had some takers and some comers. And I think that'll be a great experience.
Let's talk briefly about the other nonpartisan initiative of your office, the Pledge to Vote, which is to try to get more hard-to-reach voters. How's that going?
Very well. We've had a great response from both nonprofit partners and for-profit large employers, that is businesses, in using this program. And it's a new approach this year. The idea is that our office, the Office of Secretary of State, we can't possibly know an organization's constituents, members, employees, what have you. We can't know those people as well as those organizations do. So rather than trying to be all things to all people, we're working through those contacts and organizations so that they can get their members, employees, etc., to pledge to vote. And incidentally, the whole idea of signing a pledge card, saying that you're pledging to vote, I was initially, a couple, 2, 3 years ago, a little skeptical about that. I thought, is that really going to move the needle? Then I saw the numbers. And sure enough, when people sign a card or a form saying, I pledge to vote, whether it's guilt or shame or sense of responsibility, it actually works and people follow through on it, and it tends to be a strong motivator. I was surprised by that, but we've used that to full effect, and I hope we'll see the outcome as a good one this November.
Well, and we will find out as quickly as possible. How can citizens be assured that their vote is secure and that the voting machines will not be hacked?
Yeah, great question. A lot of, I suppose that's sort of ripped from the headlines that we've seen about alleged hacking from foreign governments and others. Bottom line is Minnesota is still, thankfully, a paper-based system. Unlike some states that kind of went for the shiny object, got paperless touchscreen voting 10, 15 years ago, we didn't do that. There's a bipartisan consensus in Minnesota for paper ballots and always, always, always a paper trail. And even the reporting to our office on election night is done through an encrypted transmission. So it would be gibberish to anyone who would try to hack it. So if someone alleges that a foreign government, or anyone for that matter, added a 0 or subtracted a 0 from someone's vote total, got in the system and hacked it, we've got paper ballots, and not only that, state law makes us keep them for 2 years. So we can always go back to paper. Ironically, in this high-tech age, paper is our friend and ultimately our savior. So while I can't say any system is perfect, and ours isn't, I think it's a very low and small likelihood that we'll have any serious problem.
Secretary, we have to stop there. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.